Director at Levementum for our Magento, e-commerce, and sugar CRM practices. And with us, we have a couple people here today who are going to be potentially or contributing, answering questions, or giving some availability for anything you might be interested in as well. In the back, the young lady who's helping everyone check in, Cheryl Tislin, is actually our practice architect on the Magento side, so particularly around technical items. Cheryl's the top resource, and she also runs the Phoenix Magento meetup group every month that meets usually once a month to go through technical sessions, topics, things like that. In fact, we had one just yesterday, so if anybody's interested in speaking to her card's on the back table as well. We also have with us, who I think he stepped out for 1 second, a gentleman named Mohan Millercord, who is the IT director and architect for Troxell Communications, who's one of our prime topics for today, is their recent implementation. Mohan's here for anyone who has questions, both either technical or even on the business-related side. All right, some of their things that they went through, what they considered and what was important to them. And then in the back, second to last table that's populated, we have a couple other people who might be interested. We have James Williams from Pier 1 Hosting. So for anyone from looking for questions around infrastructure, things like that, he's the first person to go to. And we have Melissa from Magento who's here as well. So anyone who's interested about more around the product side, anything like that, Melissa is available either today or offline to help get you any information you need. So that's just for a round of introductions. And so what I want to do is kind of lay out what we want to go through today and encourage everyone. This is meant to be a real discussion, right? It's meant to allow you guys to ask questions, get clarification. We've left it open enough from a time perspective that we want to give you as much detail as we can, but at the same token, let you guys dig into things that you're considering or evaluating or coming across for yourselves. So what we're going to do is one, just as a question for the group, how many are currently using Magento right now? So we have 2, right? And how many of you are basically kind of looking, evaluating, or trying to learn more about the product space? So that's most of you, all right, good. So we're going to go through a little bit of an introduction about Magento, talk about some of the areas that really make it stand out, things that, as a solution provider, stood out to me when we tried to pick which e-commerce platform we wanted to partner with, and also the types of things that our customers see and why it's an important solution for them. We'll go through an introduction about Troxell, the company, kind of their story, how they came to be at this point, and what were some of the business drivers that really led them down this path, and then walk you through elements of their implementation. What did they do? What did it take to do it? What were the things that, were surprises to them along those lines? And Mohan, as well as another gentleman named Craig Schramm from Troxell, will be here to give some context around that as well. So at the end, we'll just kind of recap about us a little bit more, and obviously both at the end and during, any questions you have, feel free to ask at any given time, so no problem. So let's kind of first talk a little bit about Magento as the product and solution platform. I think when you look at a lot of the different areas out there, there are a lot of different considerations and criteria you can apply when trying to pick what's the platform you want to move forward. Certainly you don't want to go through this effort every 1, 2, or 3 years, and there's a lot of different distinguishing criteria that we want to point out as around the platform that some of you may be aware of, some maybe not. So most people, when they think of e-commerce, the first things they start gravitating towards is the UI design, the layout, the look and feel. And for those of you who have deployed solutions that have worked well, not so well, or struggled to meet your expectations, you have an appreciation there's more to it than just the interface, right? So from that perspective, when we look at what Magento provides for you, yes, you have a framework and architecture to apply branding and marketing and style, if you will, that is specific to your business, your customer demographics. You have a community of pre-built templates and extensions you can start with. You can design your own themes and elements to apply to it on top of that. But you really have a platform that speaks to a lot of different parts of the operation that go beyond just a shopping cart online. So the idea that you think about what happens in terms of when you introduce new products, services, things along those lines. When you introduce complementary related items and you want to position packages, catalog items, different elements there. Magento starts by providing you a framework to show those related items, to drive additional value from your shoppers as opposed to just the drive-by impulsive item. Then you look at what happens when someone wants to purchase, getting that information into your order fulfillment system, regardless of what it is. And I think when we talk about Troxell today, you'll get a better appreciation for that. Taking the order is one part. Getting it processed, picked, packed, shipped efficiently without being a major disruption operationally, it's the next major part of it. And so what Magento gives you is a platform or integration approach that allows you to tie into multiple systems on that back end. So managing inventory, fulfillment, reflecting product catalog, real-time inventory from back-end systems, right? Especially if you sell through multiple channels over time, all the way through customer communication, marketing, email management, and providing tools for customer service, RMAs, everything else. And when we look at the roadmap, you'll see there's a lot of stuff that's built not just around the order capture, but managing the order life cycle from RMA, return requests, support information, everything else. So we're talking about something that goes much beyond design, something that really takes and operationalizes and improves an entire business cycle. So when we take some of these items and we kind of look at them in more detail, when we talk about marketing, some people come in and they're familiar with the idea of email marketing, communications, but think about all the things you do that go beyond that, from promoting groups of items, catalogs, collections, being able to upsell, basically, or suggest accessories or alternative related items to try to increase the value of every order that you're getting. And then getting your community of consumers and visitors to provide content that helps other consumers make better decisions, more informed decisions, faster decisions, right? The idea you hear social networking, everything else brought up all the time, but when you talk about how it actually matters to a business, one of your greatest sources of demand creation comes from customers seeding demand with each other, right? Reviews, blogs, feedback are part of that. So when we talk about upsell, cross-sell, anyone ever heard of Tom's Shoes? Yeah. Right? Very large national, international chain that basically, among other things, sells through Nordstrom's, things like that, and takes a proceed or portion of every pair of shoes to donate for clothing, shoes in third world countries out of every single sale. And one of the things they do very well is the idea that when you're looking at a particular product, they can position or suggest either related items, complementary, same item, different color swatch, things along those lines, and allows them to get a better level of cart retention, less abandonment over time. Right? Same thing along those lines, to give you an example. When we look at different types of customization, so if you've ever gone through and you bought a product, let's say from Dell Computers, the idea that you may start with a base, but you configure it, right? You change the memory, you change the software, the accessories, things along those lines. One of the things that Magento does is it gives you a model to say, here's not just my part and price, here's how I apply options, attributes, and other things that allow me to basically customize or configure the end product, which for you as a merchant allows you to capture added value. I was talking to a company yesterday who literally, it's a home-based business that sells catalog orders for cookies, right? One of the things that they've been trying to do is, how do I position upgraded packaging for holidays, things like that. This is part of the platform that allows you to do that, to position more than just your base product. And then one of the areas that I've seen start to get leveraged in very creative ways is the idea of how you drive retention and loyalty from your existing base. And I think most people, whether it's through airlines or anything else, are familiar with points or rewards loyalty systems, right? We've started to see that expand in a lot of different areas. So case in point, you're a distributor for someone else's products or a retailer. You have customer base who could buy similar product through more than one merchant. Even in a business-to-business setting, the idea of incentivizing people or giving them some means to come back and get credit for purchases over time, that either applies as a monetary value, or I've seen people use it as means to offset, for example, cost of specialized training for resources, right? Technical training, other services, enrollment in conferences, all of those types of things. The idea of loyalty rewards and features as a means to help you drive retention of your existing customer base. And this is something that just 3 or 4 years ago, would have been something that people spent a lot of time worrying about how to do and implement. This is something that the platform provides you right away out of the box. Now, for those of you who kind of care about this technical infrastructure end, one of the things you'll find with Magento, and this was actually important criteria for us quite a while back when we were looking at platforms, is that different customers of different size, you're going to have different scale. E-commerce is one of those things where the more successful you are, sometimes the more unpredictable the results can be, right? You do a good job of marketing, you have a great product that's positioned well, you do a good job of search engine placement, the demand is not necessarily linear. And what you have to be, everyone's fear is, I take it, I roll it out, and if you've ever seen the UPS commercial where they release the product, first order comes in, 2 orders, 5 orders, 100,000 orders, and now everybody's scratching their head, what do I do? Same thing here. You have an application that's designed to scale technically to handle very high loads of demand, regardless of what you're doing right now, right? To handle those kind of peaks and valleys. And so, between the ability to scale and grow the architecture, and we'll kind of give you kind of some ideas of what's been done with this, and the ability to integrate that to virtually any system on the back end, ERP, CRM, other tools, you have something now that fits into an overall architecture that can be deployed on cloud hosting solutions, in your data center. It's very independent. So from that perspective, there are dozens, if not hundreds of examples of large organizations that have grown their e-commerce presence to literally handling tens of thousands of visitors every hour. And it's built so that you can grow your infrastructure proportionally to your demand without having to reconfigure, redeploy the whole application every time you want to do something different. All right, so if you're here, you've probably done a little bit of research in Magento. You're aware of some of the things that's in place now around gift certificates, store credits, product pricing options, customer groups, pricing tiers, things along those lines. Some of the things you may not be familiar with are things that either have been just released or basically roadmap items coming up imminently. And I want to kind of point some of these out because one of the things that's unique in particular in Magento is that the product evolves and grows faster than just about anything else you're going to see in the space. It's very expected and predictable that once, twice, 3 times a year, you're going to see releases that don't just have tweaks and refinements, they implement new pieces of functionality that constantly give you the opportunity to do more. So when we look at version 1.1, Magento Enterprise, you'll see there's a mix of items. There are enhancements that apply to the back end, improving things like importing and exporting data, which applies directly to your technical integration approaches, to different functional elements such as additional functionality around gift wrapping, content management, the call center support functionality in terms of how to manage and track customer support issues and cases, and constantly expanding elements around things that have been in place for a while, like wish lists, things like that, adding more functionality, a lot of which comes as input that comes from the community as well. When you look at version 1.1, and I can tell you there's about 4 or 5 of these things that as a services provider, I'm actually not so happy to see being included in the product, but it's probably good for everyone else. But the idea of integration with label printing systems, RMA processing, right? It used to be something that you implement an e-commerce site, and then you have to figure out a totally different solution set on how you're going to handle return requests, everything else. You're seeing these things rolled into the product as just out-of-the-box features. The scheduling around import and exports, and then additional API expansion that allows integration to be done faster and quicker with each subsequent release. So it gives you an idea that from a product development perspective, nothing is static. It continues to grow not just feature functionality, but also in terms of administrative controls that allow you guys to grow and expand your operations piece at a time, first things first. The more successful you are, the more you can do over time. Now, before I go any further, let me just stop. Any questions on any of these? Yes, ma'am.
Did you mention what is multi-DB support refactoring?
Basically, the idea with multiple databases is that if you go back to a lot of legacy architectures, the idea that for very large databases, you may have them tied to a single disk, right? The ability to partition support across multiple database instances, which allows you to spread load technically along that. It's given the database platforms, that's usually one of the more difficult things to implement on a product, and something that companies like Oracle on the ERP side have been doing for quite a while. You don't really see that available in any e-commerce space right now, not even ATG, IBM, things like that. So it goes to a technical backend and allows you to partition and grow and scale as volume increases.
That's important for me because I'm a fulfillment company, and we like to work with clients that are looking to scale up, obviously, and are moving out of their garage and into our fulfillment center. So that would be a concern for us.
Absolutely. Where you really see it come into play in particular is very high transaction where you have implemented levels of caching and everything else to reduce it, but when you look at writing of orders versus pulling of reports, they're two very different technical cycles. They have different demands. And you can actually see a lot of different systems now partition those items out so that you can pull reports from one set, tune that database instance differently, and then write transactions to another and replicate between them. Sorry, not to get too technical. Yes, sir.
A couple of screens back, I noticed it mentioned one web, one database, two web, one database, three web, one database. Is that multiple stores can be hosted on just one database?
Not just multiple stores on one database. So let me give a couple scenarios. You have, and in fact, we have customers who do the exact same thing. You have a large catalog of products and services. And based off of the target market you're positioning to, they run off of different URLs. They may have their own branding and theme. They may have their own price lists, right? And they may have subsets of products and different levels of access for each storefront. What Magento allows you to do is not just position multiple storefronts and views off of one database so that you have a common inventory, everything else. You can take that catalog and basically slice it and position sets of products across one or multiple stores. You can apply, based off of customer profiles, rules and tiers to affect pricing, implement alternative payment and integration models. It allows you to consolidate that product inventory information but control different unique customer aspects. Any other questions?
How does it scale out of the box with, let's say, 1 million products?
1 million products?
Yeah, or even more.
So I would tell you, when we look at scaling Magento, the products, SKUs, and data size are an issue only so much as how you may go back and tune and optimize the database over time. First thing we'll look at is what are the actual traffic patterns on the site. So for example, you can have a company with 100,000 SKUs, but if they're only getting 100 to 200 orders a day, they're probably getting 500 to 600 visitors if it's B2C, less if it's B2B. And the real driver of scale is the site activity, not the data volume. Right? What you look at is that when you look at the transactions, you try to predict what's the hourly flow. Break out the transactions in a normal 12-hour day, what's it break down to minute, and then you try to get a sense from that what's your visitor patterns. And so what I would tell you is that from a scaling perspective, the single thing that affects Magento most, especially on the database side, is going to be memory on the box. And based off 1 million SKUs, we would take it, kind of look at the traffic pattern and say, okay, here's whether you run it as a single instance, 2 or 3 cluster, or load balanced instances, whatever the case is. So the data is less significant in that front as much as the usage is. Yes, sir.
So one of the packages, you could take several URLs with different storefronts and operate them under whatever level you had. You bought this package or that package,
right?
And you could operate 5 or 10 or whatever off of that same package.
Absolutely. One of our customers actually sells conference equipment podiums, like the banner you see there, right? The stands and everything else. And they have a pretty reasonably several thousand product catalog, but they actually have 2 or 3 different sites that show subsets of products and effectively run one instance of Magento with 2 to 3 different storefronts exposing different sets of products for each of them. But it's still one database, one instance.
Are any of these features available on the Community Edition?
So
or is this primarily just enterprise?
There are, basically, you see on some of them that are identified as either enterprise only or enterprise and professional only. The implication is that if you don't see that label, it's available on community as well. Right. And we can, that's, there's a good discussion topic around that as well, which we can talk about afterwards for anyone who has questions, kind of version evaluation. I would tell you that as we look at the products as a services provider again, Mohan and Craig have heard me say this before, it's always in my interest when customers want us to do lots of custom things, but one of the things you evaluate over time, quite frankly, is what's the cost of implementation and sustaining and enhancing over time versus a fixed fee, basically, that's going to offer you additional functionality every few months, every year, regardless. And there's a real value equation you go through on that, and you can quantify it really quickly, what's the best decision. Yes, sir?
What's price and promotion permission?
Pricing promotion permission is basically a similar pattern you see in different areas. You can set controls over who can create price promotions, and you can start to target these to different segments of your customers as well. So right now you have the ability to create customer groups or tiers. You can set rules that say based off of this category for customers of this type or this history, here's their price list or modifications off pricing. So if you want to implement a wholesale model versus resale, right? What we're talking about here is price and promotion permission is security around how you organize it, who can organize it, and then which types of users have visibility to it afterwards.
How can, like, if you integrate a solution and you have multiple, the customer actually wants to change the front page, like,
Okay.
what is the experience for the store owner that doesn't, not highly technical? How can they change, some content on the front page? Like, what?
So I would just kind of break that into two categories. Most of what you see visually on Magento is driven through what we call themes or templates. You create effectively what is a style sheet and some other elements that have, here's a home page structure, here's your product details page structure, here's what a category drill down page is going to be structured as. And you have the ability in that to create what we call content blocks that say, my home page, I have these 3 or 4 different areas. And through the CMS tool, I can alter and control what content displays in there without any technical programming or anything else. Create the template, go through. Now, if you want to go through and modify the template to basically create a new aesthetic, it's very much what you've seen in terms of other types of HTML graphic design, in that you're creating or modifying a style sheet. You are changing specific pages or sections of the site to alter the format. There are tools in the admin panel that allow you to do some of that dynamically. Some of it is programmatic on the back end as well. So it really depends. If you're talking about changing content within the existing theme, that's non-technical. It's on the back end through the content management systems. If you want to change the overall theme, you may or may not have some development work to do. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Good questions. So last thing I want to point out, and some of you may be looking at this, some of you may not be aware it's in place, but when we look at the current market, stats basically say now that of all people who shop online, over 20% of them this year will make purchases through mobile devices as well. So iPhone, iPad, Droid, things like that. Just like if you go back to 2001, 2002, maybe 15% of web surfers were buying online. Now it's, you have upwards of 40% people do all of their holiday shopping online, right? You're seeing the same evolution move into mobile devices as well. That the confidence in the platforms has grown, and the applications for tools like Magento have improved to create a mobile shopping experience as well. And one of the things to point out with Magento is that they have an additional application base you can leverage that allows you to create mobile applications that get submitted through iTunes so that your customers can find you and shop natively on a handheld, things like this. Same for Android, other areas as well. So again, part of the fact of showing Magento's evolution over time, and something for those of you who have that part of your roadmap or goal to be aware of as well. So as an obligatory, just to give you a sense of the nature, size, and scale, we deal with customers ourselves on this front that vary in size, from very small mom and pop businesses to very large, 9, 10-figure revenue organizations and up. you get a sense from, if you look at Magento, some sample of their customer base, whether it's North Face, Fujitsu, Nokia, these aren't tied to any one specific industry. Some of these are your traditional B2C retailers like North Face. A lot of these are leveraging, business to business infrastructures as well, selling through distribution channels online, other areas as well. And when we talk about Troxell shortly, we're going to give you an example of Magento being implemented not just for the resell, but to support a very different model than most people automatically assume around e-commerce, and it gives you a sense of the flexibility of what you can deploy. All right, so I want to transition this point. We're going to start talking a little bit about kind of the feature topic today around a company called Troxell Communications, which is here in Phoenix. And I think it's appropriate to start with a quote from a gentleman who's going to be speaking a little bit more to you today as well, and that Troxell is a reseller of electronics equipment, particularly targeted at education school districts nationwide. And when they went into this process, kind of the quote and the mindset was, they started with a flawed e-commerce approach. They tried to do everything for all customers, and what happened is they built something that was very encompassing, very powerful, and very complex, right? And had very little adoption. And so they became aware that despite their investments, all the effort they were putting around this proprietary system that they had built up, they were getting little to no activity and realized, okay, maybe we need to go back and rethink this from the beginning, right? So what we're going to do as we go through this portion is I'll introduce you to Troxell, give you some background, and I'm also going to introduce you to a gentleman here, Craig Schramm, who's Vice President at Troxell, and we're going to talk to you about their process, what they went through, some of the decision criteria that they had, because the technology is obviously important to this, but as individuals, as company people, we need to be kind of aware of the decision criteria you're going to come across with implementation of any software, Magento or otherwise. So just as some background, the Troxell's been established since 1946, so this is not a fly-by-night organization. This is a company that's been very successful for a very long time, looking to do something to expand that presence. They're the largest privately held audiovisual distributor in the United States. I mentioned that one of their target markets traditionally has been education, K through 12, university from there. Everyone's kind of aware of what's happened to capital construction projects, everything else in that market space over the last few years. So if there's no better time to look to try to improve, that's a good driver for it. So Troxell is based in Phoenix. They have 50 plus offices nationwide, distributed field sales force, and the traditional institutional buyers, like I said, have always made up the lion's share of business. So what I want to do is introduce you guys to Craig Schramm, have him come up and join me here. And Craig's going to talk through some of these things, and I'll have some things to add, but the key theme I want to segue for everyone is that as Troxell went through this, the starting point was there was so much to do on their existing site, so much that was incorporated, that the shoppers would get lost and give up. And that was the driver to go back and look to do something new. So everyone, I want to introduce you to Craig Schramm. Thank you, sir.
I thought there for a moment I had my own theme music. Well, when I transitioned out of sales 12 years ago, I was really good at speaking in front of groups. So bear with me, because I'm not anymore. After getting into IT, you kind of disappear into your hole and lose those skills. But let's see, what do we have here? Why did we decide to rebuild? Well, as it said in the previous slide, we started our first e-commerce initiative about 10, 11 years ago. When it was in its infancy, Mohan came on board and has done a huge amount of work to create a lot of tools that are very useful to our company internally, a lot of tools that are useful to our vendors. But on the customer side, we never seemed to quite click with what the customer wanted and needed. And that's what evolved over the last 10 years. It was essentially a kludge. It got the job done, but the customers didn't like it. And if the customers don't like it, they're not going to use it, and they're not going to adopt it. It's not going to work. So we essentially decided to scrap and start from scratch. We tossed away an old point of thinking if it's not built in-house, we don't want it. and decided we've got to come up with a platform that's proven. After looking at all the competitors, Magento rose to the top. And once we knew that we were going with Magento, we started to explore local partners to help us in that project. And that ended up being Levementum. We had a phone call with Derek. It was a very successful phone call. We're used to get on the phone with a consultant, and every single question, there's a lot of ahs, we'll get back to you, shuffling of paper in the background. With Derek, he was on point. Every single question was immediately answered. When the phone call wrapped up, we knew we'd found the right partner. And it's continued to feel that way the entire time. And it was a very quick ramp up. We had a CEO that said, I want to see a product that I can show customers in 2 months. And for the most part, we met that goal. Now as the site evolved and the CEO started to see the site, he saw the potential, and so the scope of the project grew. So we're a little more into it. We're about a month and a half past that point, but the number of SKUs that we were going to display online has gone up by 10. The features have grown since the initial scope of work, and so we're really about 3.5 months in the entire project and virtually ready to launch. In our feelings, that was fantastic. We were very impressed with the team, with Mohan, with Derek, Cheryl, and everybody at Levementum. We decided that we'd done so poorly in our e-commerce initiative that we wanted to, the CEO decided we wanted to revamp that segment of the company, and that's what led to this. We needed to grow that side of our customer base. We've been intensely successful in growing our customers on the face-to-face salesperson side of our sales for the entire history of the company, and we basically failed on the internet side of things, customer-wise, and that's what took us down this road. We wanted to be able to bring in institutional buyers who come in with a P card, credit card. Our particular clients buy with a card that's called a P card, schools, universities, and we've been losing those customers over the last 10 years to the Amazons, to the CDWs, et cetera. Magento now brings us right on par with them. We've actually had comparisons done between our offering and CDW's site is starting to become, in its way, a bit of a kludge. They've kind of locked themselves into a way of doing things on their site. That Magento now gives us superior tools.
What's CDW, your competitor, you said?
CDW mostly competes with us in the, we sell a lot of projectors in the AV industry, and they compete with us in that area. They specialize more in computers and computer-related products. They've got a company right here, they've got a base right here in Chandler, down the road. They're not our primary competitor amongst K-12 schools, but they are a big competitor when it comes to P-card purchases and credit card purchases, as is Amazon. As I've already been saying, we knew we needed to get aggressive. We were completely losing the drive-by shopper. They'd come to our site and most likely not even bother to register as a user to have privilege to shop. It just was not user-friendly. We had also failed to bring on the corporate buyer. Corporate buyers still only encompass maybe 4 or 5% of our sales. 80% of our sales is K-12 university. The bulk of the rest is government. So we wanted to start building a partnership with those types of buyers. We needed to simplify our online shopping experience. Derek hinted at it earlier. The tool itself has become very complex. The customer would call us up and say, I'm not clear on which price is our price. Magento was a step back to simplify things and present a very easy to understand pricing structure that took away all the complexity we had built into our old site over the years.
So Craig, this is probably a good area to give an example. Can you take a second and describe for everyone, for your traditional institutional buyers who are buying through the field, what is the process like when they go to get pricing set up? What do they go through? How do you guys have to manage it? What was everything that had to be in place before?
Well, for one, a customer had to have a relationship with us to begin with. On Magento, they don't. They can come in as a drive-by shopper, and they can buy within literally minutes. Within a minute, they can find what they want, shop for it, check out, they're done. In the past, our site made it clear that, we had to have an ongoing relationship with you, we need an account with you, before they could progress, or at least it felt that way to the shopper. If they knew how our site worked, they would see that they could drive by shop, but it didn't present that kind of a feel to the shopper.
And how did you guys manage price lists for customers traditionally, the parts and everything else they bought?
Mostly through contracts. Now, I will say that that's a future phase for our Magento implementation. We will be implementing contracted buying through Magento in a future phase with Levementum. Right now, though, we're going after primarily the drive-by shopper, the corporate shopper, who wants to come to the site, find a price, buy it, and be done. So as I said, it's a good fit for us. It's a clean interface. Our old one was not. It provides a payment gateway for Visa, MasterCard, American Express, etc. It's a clear site. It's a good fit for us. It's world-class architecture. I mentioned earlier we had a 2-month window the CEO gave us. It grew to 3.5. We're ready to launch. And if without Levementum, it never would have happened. When the CEO first imagined the site, he felt that we might have about 450 products on the site. That scope has grown over the next few phases. We're going to take that up to about 20,000 products. And that quantity of SKUs for us amounts to about 90% of our revenues. So,
Now, one of the things I think a lot of people here are technical, what was the kind of the structure of and how your individual team, Mohan, were involved in the implementation, and how were they able to contribute and kind of be able to take ownership of this going forward as well?
Mohan has been our internet programmer for going on almost 10 years, and was able to work quickly with Cheryl and the rest at Levementum. And I think it was almost as if Cheryl was a part of our company. The moment we started working with her, things progressed very quickly. They communicated well, and the final result came together pretty good. We're very impressed.
I think it's probably worth sharing for the group that Mohan and company spent about 3 to 4 days trying to deeply dive into the architecture of the platform. And within about 10 days after that, we were actually building integration layers to ERP and everything else themselves in conjunction with Cheryl and others. And we're actually major contributors to the overall site development and functionality. So, and it speaks to the idea as a platform, this is something that, competent, capable IT people can master. It's not a black box that you have to start from scratch and spend 2 years to figure out how do you do anything with this.
Yeah, as you notice, I speak better ad hoc than I do from slides. So I've said a lot of what's on the slides already when I was speaking more freely. So this addresses all the points we pretty much covered at this point. I've talked about the thousands of SKUs. We've also integrated with our ERP. It's a tight integration. When a customer shops on our current Magento site, it feeds the data straight into our ERP. It's handled in a legacy fashion. When we completed, all that data is fed right back to Magento. And we were able to do that in conjunction with Mohan and Cheryl and the rest of the crew at Levementum. We also integrated with Simpova, which is a a sales tax data house. So we don't have to keep our sales tax data up to date. Simpova does it for us. They feed us every month all the changes nationwide. We've also integrated with UPS, and we've not done the U.S. Post Office time in our case, but I will say that it is built in out of the box.
And what do you mean by that, that level of integration? You mean in terms of real-time pricing?
Correct. Our site talks to Magento, updates pricing. Magento purchases update our ERP.
Same thing with Simpova on the tax side, the idea based off of the customer type, whether they consider, when you sell to educational customers, you have to consider, is there a federal tax, is there state, municipal, are they tax-free? Depending on where they're located, the tax rule will change entirely. And what Simpova does in their case, because they have nexuses all over the country, it allows them to determine what's the appropriate tax model and rates to apply. And the same thing applies to UPS, basically, for the items that are being sold to get real-time costing off of their account and their agreed-to payment terms with UPS.
What about FedEx?
By default, FedEx, UPS, USPS, DHL, and a couple others are all supported out of the box. I mean, it's basically you're providing your credentials, and it is already a connector to the APIs for them. And you have the ability to manage effectively your markup, for handling, packaging, things along those lines. There are also, when you look at, depending on international shipments, there are other services through companies like Tamondo and others that can allow you to handle global freight and everything else through it as well.
Does it use dimensional weights to calculate the shipping costs?
In terms of volume, there's some additional work you need to do if you want to do volume-based analysis, or if you want to electively move from shipment to kind of freight forwarding, right? If you're doing very large pallet-based stuff to different locations. But there are also, this is another benefit of an open source platform in that you can go out to the extensions on the community. You can actually see a lot of these pieces of functionality have been implemented and contributed, either as free add-ons or for very inexpensive add-ons that you can base a lot of those items off of.
Okay, so yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I noticed there's a huge developer community, right, and a lot of extensions and add-ons out there. How much do you rely on these plugins and add-ons versus what comes out of the box for a typical?
It's a good question. So I would tell you that 90% of the projects we do will use some extension, right? And it could be as simple as a design template because the customer's found something that speaks to what they want, install it and go. It could be that we are working with someone who has some very specific drop ship requirements, right, in terms of how they handle it, which is unique to their business. What we find is we will leverage extensions selectively to minimize cycle time for development of custom business logic. We find that 90% of what you're going to do is going to be start with out-of-the-box Magento, right? You're going to fill very specific gaps or needs with design templates, something along those lines. And then from there, you will have, either through your own IT or someone like us, kind of implement logic, workflow, or other specific business rules that are truly custom. So we always leverage them, but in part because it's just a value add for someone who wants to go a little bit further. Yes, sir.
Just as an example, we have 10 million SKUs and 3 extensions. One of which is a dropship, because we use a dropship model.
Yep.
And that's probably the biggest one that we've used and the most helpful. So
Yeah.
just to kind of give you an idea, we've got 3 of them basically.
So the extensions, is it very much a plug-in model or okay, new Magento upgrade comes along. How does that affect the extensions? I mean, obviously the extensions will have to keep up somehow, but.
So I'll give it to you an answer kind of in perfect world setting, knowing that there are literally thousands of extensions available, right? Part of Magento as a platform, some people have a fear of open source because it's beneficial. You can change anything. It can also be risky because you can change anything, right? And what Magento has done very well is build a prescriptive architecture that says, look, you want to change the behavior of this step of the checkout. There's a specific way to go about it that preserves upgrade compatibility, right? That makes it, resilient from release to release. The extensions, by and large, are built such that they leverage that architecture, right? So that you're plugging into the custom elements of that basically preserve and separate what you have changed versus the core. So Magento, when they upgrade their contract, is they'll change the core, they leave the custom side alone, right? And the engine, the MVC, renders them and keeps the result constant. We find that realistically about 95% of the extensions we will leverage or a customer asks us to leverage fit that model, precisely. And if in the case where we have something that doesn't, then that's, for us, that's a communication back to the customer saying, do you want to leverage this? Do you want to do something different, right? But for the most part, they're very consistent on that front.
And we use plugins on our site. We've taken the layer navigation that's out of box and enhanced it with an enhanced layer navigation. And I would say that we're very pleased that that plugin was available because it gave us a lot of power immediately.
Yes, sir.
Was there anything that you guys thought would work the way it should work right out of the box, that when you got it, you figured out that you had to tweak it pretty hard in order to make it to do what you wanted it to do?
No, I would say by the time, in the beginning of our relationship, Derek came in and did a discovery session with us. Sat down with key employees, interviewed, asked questions, and prompted feedback. By the time we were done with that afternoon, I would say we all, on both sides, had a sense of what Magento could do for us out of box and what we would need to do custom. So for sure, going forward, we have no false sense of, hey, I thought it would do this. I can't think of a single time we thought, hey, I thought it would do this.
I think one of the things that we would tell you as kind of a service provider is that there's, and most people could agree with this, there are some things that to you as a company are more valuable, right, have the greatest impact. And one of the things, as a person who spent most of my career buying software and services and implementing these types of things for my employers, I wanted to get a sense of, if I knew the 10 things that were most important, I wanted to get a sense of the relative cost, effort, and complexity around those so that I could make prioritized decisions about what I did now, what I came back to later, right? The process Craig described, what we call discovery session, is just that. It's going through and mapping out all of the potential requirements of what you could do, what the relative effort is of each of those, so that you can sit back and say, okay, of the 300 things that are on my wish list, I'm going to focus on these 50, right? Implement those, be successful, and then let that success pay for the next set of things I want to do, right? And that's one of the important parts to keep visibility and predictability as you go through an implementation, is having that sense of kind of weighted prioritization of all that could be done.
This was one of the reasons that we actually ended up going with Magento. We wanted to find a partner in the development side that had a viable product that we could see that its future was at least elongated out past my lifetime. We didn't want to end up in a Y2K situation. We learned very quickly in the beginning of the partnership that eBay was buying into Magento fully. They were already a partner, and they bought them out fully, and that also weighed in our decision. We wanted to make sure we had a solid software that wasn't going to obsolete itself in a few years. In the discovery with our CEO, we felt that our agenda was to not only build our customer base, but to build our revenues to the point where we knew that a certain amount of face-to-face sales would slide over to the e-commerce side, figure about 20%, and that we'd gain approximately another 30% from new customers that we had lost over the last 10 years due to buying from our competitors online and not buying from us online. So our overall goal is to have about 50% of our revenues over about a 5-year period come from the e-commerce side.
So before we transition and I start talking about us, let me kind of pause for everyone who's in the audience. Questions for Craig or Mohan or myself about the project, things that we encountered, things you want to know more about, anything along those areas?
You said that you feed the information back into Magento. Do you do that to provide some sort of customer portal, to provide like an order history, an inventory counter or a product count of what they purchased, to provide additional discounts, that sort of thing?
Order history and tracking comes from our main ERP, and it's fed back into Magento.
I mean, you can think about the idea that as you introduce products, services, or replenish inventory, especially if you're reselling other people's items, the idea that you can take that, manage and provision it through your traditional back-end processes, feed that in and basically dynamically reflect that in the e-commerce site so that you have one definition of inventory, stocking, everything else, as well as order history, updates, statuses, etc. That's level what we're looking for.
So you only manage the pricing and things like that through your ERP, and you don't really touch Magento for that? It automatically pushes the new prices?
That's correct. That's as we work through our first couple of phases, that'll be exactly how it'll flow.
I think if you consider that, most people's order activity, if you have people who are taking orders via PO from fax, orders that are called into a rep, you have orders coming from the internet, one of the things you're trying to do is Those all get placed through a common process for pick, pack, ship, fulfillment, invoicing, everything else. One thing you really want to avoid, especially if you're successful and you're starting to see growth, is to create 2 or 3 separate operational fulfillment models, right? You don't want to take one and then have to create, okay, in this case, we ship an order this way, or this way, or this way. Because you're driving the operational costs and complexity on the back end, you're not getting as much out for the increased order volume or margin on the front end. So what we're trying to do, and it was kind of slide 1 or 2 ago, is that we've taken, for the most part, the goal was to take Troxell's existing operational processes and make the Magento activity, whether it's product pricing management, order activity, go through the same model so that the back-end staff, customer service, accounting, are managing these processes in one way, as opposed to having to handle 2 or 3 different approaches.
Exactly. To add to that, one of the reasons why we wanted it, why we chose it is, we did not want to leave this as a separate island. We have an existing system and we wanted it to coexist with the whole ecosystem so that there is an order processing and fulfillment, everything can be very easily and tightly integrated. So when we looked at it, it's much easier to achieve with this one. So that's a very key factor which we said, yes, we can head this direction and get things moving. Yeah, I would add to that.
And
yes.
actually, that's exactly the reason I'm here, is because our clients are asking for the same thing. They want a virtual warehouse. It's the same thing as what you have your own warehouse. But some clients have an outsourced warehouse. But we need to be able to have a platform that we can work with that integrates back to the enterprise system so that we're not out of the loop as a warehouse. We're completely in the loop. It's just a virtual loop. So that's one of the things that I wanted to follow up with you about, because
Absolutely.
that's the big deal. It can't be a separate system. You have to be integrated into the existing business process, or else
The whole
you're a
system,
vendor
we
that
did
has
not
to
want to disturb it and then introduce a new learning curve for the people who are used to working in a certain style in day-to-day in operating the business. So
Right.
this should complement it rather than creating a new challenge for them. So
I'll point
this-
out, we had
Yeah.
several departments coming to us and saying, when are we getting training, when are we going to get training? And we let them know, you don't need it. Because this
do
is
the
happening
same thing.
transparently behind the scenes. It's the same day, different source.
Yes, sir.
So are you saying that you're managing the categories and products and as well as images and everything all in the ERP system?
The categories and the images are managed through the Magento CSM,
Okay.
CMS.
And what about the products?
Products, pricing, inventory is all coming out of ERP.
ERP.
And then what kind of the model is through phase 1 is that for content that is truly web specific, so attribute data, for example, categorization, which on a web navigation structure, obviously products can be represented through multiple layers versus fulfillment warehouse side. That which is completely web specific, product marketing can manage through Magento, so they're not having to be in the ERP. But for everything that affects the capture of an order, fulfillment of the order, product inventory like that, there's one basic central location for all of that, one set of processes.
And I can say, based on what I've witnessed in the process, depending on what your scenario is, I'm guessing it could be accomplished by working with somebody who can customize the code. I think it could be accomplished.
Now, do you also manage back orders and push that up to the web as well? Is that
Back orders are not an issue on our side at this point.
right?
It's not it doesn't fit our model, but I imagine it could be.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes,
one
sir.
of the key things to know with Troxell is a significant portion, more than half of orders are actually drop ships, right? And so what's really happening, this is part of the complexity and why the integration layer is important, is that the order's hitting ERP and then it's being parsed to different manufacturers or vendors or warehouse locations that are responsible for final mile delivery, right? That activity of feedback that comes on ship status, confirmation, everything else is coming from multiple channels back through one source. And so